I'm Michael Cherkis, the creator of Red Harvest and co-creator of The Silent Invasion, and this is the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Michael Cherkis in preparation to exhibit his books at Toronto Comic Con. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button to be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Ukrainian-Canadian author Michael Cherkis was born in Oshawa, Ontario. He's worked for over 30 years as a graphic designer, art director, cartoonist, and illustrator. He still enjoys using non-repro blue pencils, brush, India ink, and paper while making comics. His comics include The Silent Invasion with Larry Hancock, Suburban Nightmares with Larry Hancock and John Van Bruggen, The Purple Ray with Larry Hancock, and The New Frontier with John Sablik. His latest graphic novel is Red Harvest from NBM Publishing. In 2024, Michael Cherkis with Larry Hancock were nominated for an Eisner Award in the category of Best Short Story for Talking to a Hill. Although they didn't win that award, the anthology, Comics for Ukraine, in which the short story was published, did win the 2024 Eisner Award for Best Anthology. Edited by Scott Dunbar, the Comics for Ukraine anthology featured more than 36 comic book writers, artists, colorists, letters, designers, and editors, including Michael Cherkis, with a collection of all new comic book stories to raise money to aid refugees in Ukraine. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Michael Cherkis in preparation to exhibit his books at Toronto Comic Con. So, Michael Cherkis, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Glad to be here.
I appreciate your time. Before we get going with all the questions, I would like to know, what are you reading today?
Do you mean as a prose book?
It could be anything.
Well, actually, I am reading a novel by Georges Simenon called The Venice Train, which I read probably about 30 or 40 years ago, and I decided to reread it because I wanted to find a short book that I could read in 2 or 3 days.
Oh, and that's going well for you?
Yes, I'm halfway through it. I only have half, and I've been reading it for 2 nights, and I expect I'll have it finished in 2 days.
That's amazing. Good on you.
And that's what I like, a short book.
Sure. Now I was reading about your many speaking events that you've had in support of your graphic novel, Red Harvest. I want to ask you about the feedback you've received from readers. What have they been telling you about the book?
Well, so far, most of the feedback has been pretty positive. People are glad that I've done it. I'm not so sure what they think after they've read it. I have gotten feedback via Instagram where one person thought it was the most obviously hand-drawn graphic novel they'd read in a number of years, which I thought was interesting because I know that when I read comics now, you can really tell when they have been created on a computer, using computer software, whether it's just the lettering or the preciseness of the inking. Anyway, that was an interesting comment to find that somebody thought it was the most hand-drawn comic they'd read in years. Pretty much everybody's pretty positive about it, especially from the Ukrainian community. They're glad that I've done this book, simply because there's not a lot of graphic novels about the Ukrainian famine out there.
Right. So I'm wondering, the next question would be, does that response, hopefully positive response, inspire you to write more about historical moments of Ukraine?
Well, that's a curious question, because actually after I started working on this, and in the last 5 or 6 years, and because of the events going on in Ukraine, as we all know, because of the Russian invasion, I follow Ukrainian cartoonists who are based in Ukraine. And I know that some of them are already doing books like that, covering historical moments in Ukraine. And I think it's more important for them to do it than me, because they live there. They've got that experience, where in the sense that their family has always been there.
Right.
whereas I am Canadian and I would bring my Canadian perspective to it.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Is there not maybe a Canadian sensibility about it, though, that a lot of Ukrainians came over, and helped settle Canada, did they not?
Oh yeah, actually, I wouldn't mind. There's a couple of graphic novels related to the Ukrainian experience in Canada that I'm interested in exploring. One, something to do with, and I'm not going to explain it much. I'm just going to say it's a story set in the 1890s when the Ukrainians first came to Western Canada. Basically, it's 1 year. It's the first year they get here, and it's basically their interaction with the indigenous people is what I
Hmm.
want to do a story on. But I don't know if that will ever come out. And the other one that I have started work on is to use my family's history. That is my mother's family. Her parents arrived in Canada in the early 1900s and they had 9 children. And I want to use these 9 children as sort of a exploration of how people assimilate in different ways into the new culture. Would cover about a 50-year period. And if I'm going to relate it to something, it would be like the way Will Eisner told. Basically, when he was doing his historical graphic novels that kind of related to his life, but they weren't his life. It's like fake
Hmm.
autobiography is what it is.
Okay. Okay.
I think that's called autofiction. Is that what they
Okay.
call it?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah,
indeed.
that's
Yeah.
the term, autofiction. So
Okay.
it's basically an autofiction graphic novel using my family as the basis. And that gets into the whole thing about assimilation, because all 9 of the kids assimilated in different ways into the Canadian society.
Good historical stuff there for sure. Now, switching gears a wee bit, I read that you and your creative partner, Larry Hancock, will have a table at the Toronto Comic Con that's coming up. Wanted to ask a little bit more about what you'll have at your table for people to purchase.
Well, we're going to have the usual, there are 4 volumes of The Silent Invasion, a reprint of a selection of Suburban Nightmare stories. I will have Red Harvest there, and there will be a few Ashcan editions of our Purple Ray superhero comic, which is the other graphic novel that Larry and I are working on. So
Yeah, I remember you talked about that last time. Could you just remind me again about what that story is about?
basically, a story about a superhero who lives in this world, not our world, but his comic book world, where he was the only superhero to have existed. And he had his powers for a short time, lost them after about 3 or 4 years. But while he had them, he sold the rights to his life story to a comic book company, and they have made millions off of him while keeping him on a minimal retainer that he can barely live on. And so it's a story where he wants to get the rights to his life back.
And you'll have a sneak peek of that at your table for people to check
Yeah,
out.
yeah. We'll have a sneak peek. And I like to say it's a real sneak peek in the sense that when we finally get the finished graphic novel done, it will look a lot different than the black and white rough drawings in the ash can.
Right. I was going through my notes. I remembered that you and Larry received an Eisner Award nomination last year for a story that appeared in Comics for Ukraine. I wonder if you could talk a wee bit about that experience.
Yeah, that was interesting. I found out about comics from Ukraine through the grapevine of the internet, or somebody told me. I don't remember, but when I found out Scott Dunbier was doing it, I emailed him and asked if I could contribute to it, because I said, that's a book I want to contribute a story to. Scott said, yeah, go ahead. And Larry and I came up with the story about, we called it Talking to a Hill, which is basically a translation of a Ukrainian saying, you can always talk to a hill, but a hill is still a hill, which I guess is like talking to the wall in English. Basically, it's a story about a woman who's an ethnic Russian, born in Ukraine, married to a Ukrainian person, and they're living in Kiev, but her parents live in Moscow. They basically are drinking the Putin Kool-Aid, and they don't believe what she's telling them. She says, they keep saying, well, whatever you're saying is all a lie, even though she's living in Kiev, right? That somehow Kiev is run by neo-Nazi fascists with a Jewish president. Anyway, somehow the the Russians were drinking the Kool-Aid, right? So basically it's how the people in Russia don't believe what's going on in Ukraine. It's actually based on, I'm going to say, anecdotal stories, true anecdotes that I've heard of people that have lived through this, like Ukrainians in Ukraine talking to their relatives in Russia. The Russian relatives don't believe them.
Pardon my ignorance, but did you guys actually win the award?
The story was nominated. We didn't win the award, but Comics for Ukraine, the anthology, did win the best anthology last year.
Oh, congrats. That's great news then.
I guess we were part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good story overall. That's not bad.
But I don't know who won the award for best short story.
I'll have to look that up. Well, we remember being at the very warm and wonderful Montreal Comic Arts Festival, a lot different from what we're experiencing now in Toronto. Do you have any other events lined up for this year, or is it a little bit too early to talk about that?
We're hoping to be at TCAF. We don't know. And we have applied for a table at MCAF. We applied late, so we didn't, we're sort of kind of on a waiting list. We're going to be at Fan Expo in August. And we think we might be in the Fan Expo in Edmonton in September. That's not confirmed either. And we're not going anywhere in the States. I've made a conscious decision not to go there this year.
You've mentioned a lot of projects, books that you might be writing about your family history. You've got Purple Ray on the go. Any other projects that might be sort of swirling around that you might be working on this year?
Larry and I are still talking about doing a fifth Silent Invasion. But once my graphic design work kind of slows down in the next 3 months, because honestly, I'm going to say for the last 6 months, I've hardly done any comics because the graphic design work has just been too much of it. I've had too much. So I really want to focus on the Purple Ray for the next year in terms of drawing, but in terms of like developing. I want to do the Purple Ray is my main project. Project I'll be working on next would be my family story, kind of photo fiction that I was talking about. And that's sort of in the writing stages.
Very good. Well, with everything you've got on the go, where do you recommend people go online to find out about your current and your future projects?
My current projects, they could go to the NBM website because they're a publisher. They have all the Silent Invasion books. I believe they're still all in print. And Red Harvest. Red Harvest has gone into a second printing. I should let you know that.
That's great.
That's nice to hear. And then, of course, we have a moribund Facebook page, a Silent Invasion Facebook page, and I don't know the address of it right now offhand.
I'll put that in the show notes for sure.
That's about it. Oh, I do have an Instagram page, but I haven't posted there in a long time, called Silent Invasion Comics, I think. But I haven't posted there in a while because I haven't had a lot of new stuff or new drawings to put up.
Thanks to Michael for the chat. You can discover more about Michael Cherkas online with Silent Invasion on Facebook at facebook.com/the_silent_invasion and on Instagram at instagram.com/silentinvasioncomics. And thank you for tuning in to the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit True North Country Comics website to listen to even more conversations and discover more about creators' insight on making comic books and graphic novels. I also encourage you to subscribe via the website so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media sites, and you're encouraged to send any and all feedback to John at truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2025.